Marcus Thompson never imagined that one simple act of kindness would change his life forever. What started as a regular Tuesday morning at his barbershop in downtown Phoenix would spiral into a chain of events that would test everything he believed about community, sacrifice, and what it truly means to serve others. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Thompson's traditional cuts as Marcus unlocked the front door of his small barbershop on East Roosevelt Street. The familiar scent of aftershave and leather from the vintage barber chairs filled the air as he flipped the sign from closed to open. At 34, Marcus had been running this shop for 8 years, having taken over the lease from old Mr. Ramirez, who'd retired to Tucson. The shop wasn't much to look at from the outside, squeezed between a laundromat and a corner market, in a part of Phoenix that gentrification hadn't quite reached yet. But inside, Marcus had created something special. The black and white checkered floor gleamed under the warm lighting, and the walls were lined with photographs of satisfied customers spanning nearly a decade. 3 classic barber chairs dominated the space, though Marcus could only afford to keep one fully operational most days. Business has been struggling lately. The pandemic had hit small shops like his particularly hard, and even though things had slowly started picking up, Marcus found himself behind on rent more often than he cared to admit. His landlord, Patricia Hernandez, had been patient, but patience only stretched so far when you owned 6 properties in the area and had your own bills to pay. Marcus was organizing his tools when he noticed movement outside the window. A man was sitting on the bus bench across the street, the same spot he'd occupied for the past 3 days. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair that had grown wild and unkempt, and clothes that had seen better days. What caught Marcus's attention wasn't just the man's disheveled appearance, but the way he carried himself. There was a certain posture, a straightness to his spine, even in his current circumstances, that suggested military training. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Mrs. Chun from the flower shop next door stopped by for her husband's monthly trim. A few regulars came in for touch-ups, but Marcus kept glancing toward the window, watching the man on the bench. Around 11:30, during a lull between customers, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stepped outside, the Arizona heat hitting him immediately despite the early hour. The man on the bench looked up as Marcus approached, his eyes alert and cautious. "Morning," Marcus said, extending his hand. "I'm Marcus Thompson. I own the barber shop across the street." The man hesitated before accepting the handshake. His grip was firm, confirming Marcus's suspicions about military training. "Daniel Patterson," he replied, his voice hoarse but steady. "I've noticed you've been out here for a few days." "I was wondering if you might be interested in a haircut. No charge." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly, not with hostility but with the wariness of someone who'd learned to be suspicious of free offers. "I appreciate the gesture, but I can't pay you." "I said no charge," Marcus repeated. "Look, I've got some time between appointments, and frankly, I could use the practice. Been trying to perfect a new technique I learned from a tutorial online." It was a small lie, but Marcus sensed that Daniel's pride needed a reason that didn't feel like charity. After a long moment, Daniel nodded. Inside the shop, Daniel settled into the main barber chair while Marcus draped the cape around his shoulders. As he began working, trimming away months of neglect, Daniel slowly began to open up. He was a Marine veteran, discharged 8 years ago after 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd worked construction for a while, but a back injury had made physical labor impossible. Disability benefits barely covered basic needs, and when his mother passed away last year, he'd lost the family home to medical debt. "Been staying at the shelter downtown when there's space," Daniel explained as Marcus carefully shaped his beard. "But it fills up fast. Sometimes you end up wherever you can find a safe spot." Marcus listened without judgment, his hands working steadily. He'd grown up in this neighborhood and had seen plenty of people struggling to get by. His own father had worked 2 jobs just to keep their family afloat, and Marcus had learned early that circumstances could change for anyone, anytime. As the haircut progressed, something remarkable happened. Daniel's transformation wasn't just physical, though the clean haircut and neatly trimmed beard revealed a handsome, dignified face, but his entire demeanor began to shift. His shoulders straightened further, his voice grew stronger, and something that had been dimmed began to shine in his eyes again. When Marcus finished and spun the chair around to face the mirror, Daniel stared at his reflection in silence for a long moment. His eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. "I haven't looked like myself in months," he whispered. Marcus handed him a small mirror to check the back. "You look like the Marine you've always been." Daniel stood and shook Marcus's hand again, this time with both of his. "Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you." After Daniel left, Marcus felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun streaming through his windows. He'd always believed that his work was about more than just cutting hair. It was about helping people feel their best, about dignity and self-respect. Today had proven that belief in a way he'd never experienced before. The rest of the week passed quietly. Marcus didn't see Daniel again, though he found himself looking toward the bus bench more frequently than usual. Business continued at its usual slow but steady pace. He managed to make his rent payment, though it left him with barely enough for groceries and utilities. Then, the following Tuesday, Patricia Hernandez walked through his door. She wasn't there for a haircut. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, her expression serious. "I've got some difficult news." Patricia explained that she'd received an offer from a development company to purchase the entire block. The offer was substantial enough to set her up comfortably for retirement. But it came with conditions. All current leases would be terminated within 60 days to make way for a luxury apartment complex. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this place means everything to you, but I can't turn down this kind of money. My husband's medical bills from his cancer treatment last year. We're still paying them off." Marcus nodded, understanding even as his world crumbled around him. 60 days? 60 days. "I'll return your security deposit, of course, and I'll give you a good reference for anywhere else you want to apply." After Patricia left, Marcus sat alone in his shop, staring at the photographs on the wall. 8 years of building relationships, creating a community space, establishing trust with his customers, all of it would be gone in 2 months. The development company was offering existing tenants first priority on the new retail spaces in the planned complex, but the lease rates they were proposing were triple what Marcus currently paid. It might as well have been $1 million. That evening, Marcus called his sister Jennifer in Flagstaff to share the news. She offered to let him stay with her family while he figured out his next move, but they both knew the job market for barbers in small mountain towns was limited. His regular customers began hearing about the situation, and several offered to help however they could, but most were working-class people dealing with their own financial struggles. Marcus spent sleepless nights running numbers, exploring every possible option. He looked into small business loans, but his credit wasn't strong enough to qualify for the amount he'd need. He considered partnering with another barber, but couldn't find anyone in a position to make such a significant investment. The dream of Thompson's traditional cuts was slipping away, one day at a time. 3 weeks before his lease termination, Marcus was closing up shop when he noticed a familiar figure across the street. Daniel Patterson was back at the bus bench, but he looked different. The haircut Marcus had given him weeks ago was still neat, and his clothes, while simple, were clean and pressed. Daniel crossed the street and approached the shop. "Marcus, I heard about what's happening with your lease. Word travels fast around the shelters and soup kitchens." Marcus unlocked the door and invited Daniel inside. "Yeah, it's been a tough few weeks, but that's life, right? Sometimes things don't work out the way you plan. I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me, Daniel said. That haircut. It gave me something back that I didn't even realize I'd lost. The next day, I was able to get a job interview at a warehouse. Been working there ever since. Marcus smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. That's fantastic, Daniel. I'm really happy for you. The thing is, Daniel continued, I've been thinking about what you did for me, and I realized something. You didn't just give me a haircut. You gave me back my dignity. You treated me like a human being worth caring about when most people wouldn't even make eye contact. Daniel paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. I've been talking to some of the other guys who've heard this story. Marines stick together, you know. And we've got a few ideas about how we might be able to help. Marcus was about to respond when Daniel held up his hand. Before you say anything, I want you to know what's about to happen. You earned this. Every bit of it. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his shop to find something unusual. A small group of men in civilian clothes stood outside, chatting quietly among themselves. As he approached, Daniel stepped forward from the group. Marcus, I'd like you to meet some friends of mine, Daniel said. This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporal Williams, and Sergeant Major Jackson. Each man stepped forward to shake Marcus's hand with the same firm grip Daniel had. Marcus noticed immediately that despite their casual clothes, they all carried themselves with unmistakable military bearing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Daniel told us what you did for him, Rodriguez said. More importantly, he told us what kind of man you are. Marcus unlocked the shop door, inviting them inside. I appreciate you all stopping by, but really, what I did wasn't anything special. Just basic human decency. That's exactly the point, said Sergeant Major Jackson, a distinguished-looking black man in his mid-50s. Basic human decency isn't as common as it should be, especially when it comes to how veterans are treated on the streets. As they settled into the shop, Marcus learned their stories. Rodriguez had served 3 tours in Iraq before transitioning to civilian life as a mechanic. Williams had been a Marine for 12 years, before becoming a social worker, specializing in veteran services. Jackson was a career Marine who'd retired after 25 years, and now worked as a coordinator for veteran affairs in the Phoenix area. We've all been where Daniel was, Williams explained. Maybe not homeless, but we've all struggled with the transition back to civilian life. We know what it's like to feel invisible, to have people look right through you like you don't exist. Jackson leaned forward in his chair. What you did for Daniel rippled through our community. He's been telling everyone about the barber who treated him with respect, who gave him back his confidence. You have no idea how many conversations that single act of kindness has started. Marcus was moved but still confused about their visit. I'm grateful Daniel is doing well, and I'm honored to meet all of you. But I'm not sure what we know about your lease situation, Rodriguez interrupted gently. Daniel did some research after he heard. We know you've got 2 weeks left, and we know you've been trying everything to find a way to stay. The thing is, Jackson continued, we've been looking for a way to give back to our community. We've each been successful in our post-military careers, and we've been discussing how to make a real difference. Williams pulled out a folder from his bag. We've been meeting for months, talking about starting a foundation that supports businesses owned by people who genuinely serve their communities. People who go above and beyond, who make a difference in ways that don't get headlines or recognition. Marcus felt a flutter of hope but tried to temper his expectations. That sounds like amazing work. Your situation is exactly what we've been planning for, Jackson said. But we needed to make sure about the kind of person you are before we could move forward. Over the next hour, the 3 men explained their investigation. They'd spoken with Marcus's customers, his neighbors, his former teachers, even his high school football coach. They'd learned about the time he'd given free haircuts to kids before school started each year, about how he'd stayed open late to accommodate working parents, about the way he'd quietly helped elderly customers who couldn't afford his full prices. Mrs. Chun from the flower shop told us about the winter you let her husband work in your shop when their heat was shut off, Rodriguez said. You charged him nothing and gave him odd jobs to help him feel useful. Tommy Ramirez at the corner. Marca told us how you organized the neighborhood watch program after those break-ins 2 years ago, Williams added. And Sarah Mitchell from the community center says you've been volunteering to cut hair for job seekers every month for 3 years, Jackson concluded. Marcus felt overwhelmed. He'd never thought of these actions as anything more than being a good neighbor. This is my community. These are my people. Exactly, Jackson said. That's why we want to help. Williams opened the folder and pulled out several documents. We formed the Semper Fi Community Foundation. Our first initiative is to provide emergency business assistance to community pillars who are facing unfair displacement. Marcus's heart began to race as Williams laid out the papers. We're prepared to offer you a no-interest loan for the full amount you'd need to secure a new location, plus 6 months of operating expenses while you rebuild your customer base, Rodriguez explained. Marcus stared at the documents, afraid to believe what he was hearing. I don't know what to say. This is incredible, but I have to be honest with you. My credit isn't great, and I don't have much for collateral. We're not a bank, Jackson said with a smile. We don't care about your credit score. We care about your character, and Daniel's testimony, combined with what we've learned from your community, tells us everything we need to know about your character. The only requirement, Williams added, is that once you're back on your feet, you agree to be part of our network. We want to create a community of business owners who support each other and help identify others who deserve assistance. Marcus felt tears building in his eyes. I can't accept this. It's too much. You can and you will, Jackson said firmly. But there's more. Rodriguez reached into his own bag and pulled out another folder. We took the liberty of scouting potential locations for your new shop. We found a place about 6 blocks from here, closer to the downtown business district. Better foot traffic, more parking, and the space is bigger. The photograph showed a beautiful corner location with large windows and enough space for 4 Barber chairs. The rent was higher than his current location, but the loan terms the foundation was offering would make it manageable. The current tenant is a vintage clothing store that's moving to a larger location in Scottsdale, Williams explained. They're willing to sell you some of their fixtures at a discount, including display cases that would work perfectly for your retail products. Retail products? Marcus asked. We also think you should expand your services, Jackson suggested. Quality pomades, beard oils, shaving supplies. Maybe even offer mobile barbering services for elderly clients or people with disabilities. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, trying to process everything. Why me? There must be hundreds of business owners in this city who need help. Because, Daniel said, speaking for the first time since the introductions, when you looked at me sitting on that bench, you didn't see a homeless veteran. You didn't see a problem or a charity case. You saw a Marine who deserved respect and dignity. That's rare, Marcus. That's worth investing in. Jackson nodded. We've learned that the best way to strengthen a community is to support the people who are already strengthening it. You've been doing this work for years without recognition or reward. Now it's time for the community to support you. Marcus looked around his soon-to-be former shop, at the photographs on the walls, at the chair where he'd restored Daniel's dignity, at these men who were offering him a future he'd never dared to dream of. What do I need to do? He asked. Williams smiled and pulled out a pen. Sign here and let us know when you want to start looking at the new location. As Marcus signed the papers, His hands shaking slightly, he realized that his act of kindness hadn't just changed Daniel's life. It had changed his own in ways he was only beginning to understand. "There's one more thing," Jackson said as they prepared to leave. "We'd like to schedule a grand opening for your new location. We want the whole community to know about Thompson's traditional cuts and what you represent." And, Rodriguez added, with a grin, "We're going to make sure every Marine in the Phoenix area knows where to get a proper haircut." As the men left, Marcus stood alone in his shop, holding the papers that represented not just financial salvation, but validation that his approach to life and business had meaning beyond what he'd ever imagined. The following Saturday, Marcus found himself standing outside 425 North Central Avenue, keys in hand, staring at what would become the new Thompson's Traditional Cuts. The space was everything the Marines had promised and more. Large windows flooded the interior with natural light, and the corner location provided excellent visibility from two busy streets. Daniel stood beside him, having insisted on being part of the transition process. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. Marcus took a deep breath and unlocked the door. The space was larger than his previous shop, with exposed brick walls and polished concrete floors that gave it a modern yet timeless feel. The previous tenant had left behind several vintage display cases and a beautiful, antique cash register that would fit perfectly with Marcus's vision. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up from this dream," Marcus said, running his hand along the smooth surface of the main counter. "It's real," Daniel assured him. "And you've earned every bit of it." Over the next 2 weeks, the transformation began. Jackson had connected Marcus with a network of veteran-owned businesses throughout Phoenix. Rodriguez, who owned an electrical contracting company, handled all the wiring and lighting installation at cost. Williams, through his social work connections, found a furniture restoration specialist who refurbished 3 additional Barber chairs that had been donated by a salon supply company going out of business. The most surprising help came from Marcus's former customers and neighbors. Mrs. Chen organized a painting party, bringing her extended family and several other business owners from the old neighborhood. Tommy Ramirez coordinated food deliveries for all the volunteers. Even Patricia Hernandez, his former landlord, stopped by with a housewarming gift. Vintage barber pole she'd found at an estate sale. "I felt terrible about having to evict you," she told Marcus as they installed the pole outside the new shop. "This doesn't make up for it, but I wanted you to know I never stopped believing you'd land on your feet." Sarah Mitchell from the community center brought news that would reshape Marcus's understanding of his impact. "We've had 12 veterans contact us in the past month asking about job placement services," she said. Every one of them mentioned hearing about a barber who helped a Marine get back on his feet. 12? Marcus was stunned. Daniel's story has been spreading through the veteran community like wildfire. These men and women are finally feeling comfortable reaching out for help because they've seen that there are people who will treat them with dignity. This revelation led to the most significant expansion of Marcus's business model. Jackson proposed creating a formal partnership between Thompson's Traditional Cuts and the Veteran Services Network. Every Thursday would become Veteran Services Day, offering free haircuts, job interview preparation, and connections to employment resources. "We're not just talking about charity," Jackson explained during a planning meeting at the new shop. "We're talking about creating a comprehensive support system, a place where veterans can network, share resources, and rebuild confidence." Williams had researched similar programs in other cities. There's a barber shop in Atlanta that's become the unofficial veteran community center for their area. They have job boards, support group meetings, even financial literacy classes. "The beauty of it," Rodriguez added, "is that it's happening in an environment where men already feel comfortable. There's something about a barber shop that breaks down barriers. People talk more honestly when they're getting their hair cut." Marcus was intrigued but cautious. "I want to help, but I'm still just one person trying to run a business." That's where the foundation comes in, Jackson explained. We're prepared to fund a part-time coordinator position, someone who can manage the Veteran Services Program, while you focus on barbering. Daniel raised his hand. I'd like to apply for that position. The room fell silent as everyone processed this unexpected development. Daniel had been working at the warehouse for over a month, but Marcus could see in his eyes that this opportunity represented something much deeper. I've been thinking about this since you all started planning, Daniel continued. I know what it's like to feel lost after military service. I know how hard it is to ask for help, and I know what it means when someone treats you like you matter. If I can help other veterans feel what I felt when Marcus gave me that haircut, then I've found my purpose. Williams nodded approvingly. The foundation has been looking for someone with lived experience to coordinate our community outreach. Daniel, you'd be perfect. The grand opening was scheduled for the first Saturday in November. Marcus had expected a modest celebration with his regular customers and the Marine Network. Instead, the event grew into something resembling a community festival. The Phoenix Mayor's office reached out after hearing about the Veteran Services Program, offering to provide a proclamation recognizing Marcus's community service. Local news stations picked up the story, drawn by the combination of veteran support and small business success. 3 days before the opening, Marcus was putting finishing touches on the shop when an unexpected visitor arrived. A well-dressed woman in her 60s knocked on the door, introducing herself as Margaret Foster. I'm the regional director for the Small Business Administration, she explained. I've been following your story through the Veteran Services Network, and I wanted to meet you personally. Margaret explained that the government was launching a new initiative to support small businesses that demonstrated exceptional community engagement. Thompson's Traditional Cuts had been recommended as a model program. We'd like to feature your shop in our national case study on community-centered business practices, she said. More importantly, we'd like to offer you access to additional resources, marketing support, business development workshops, even potential expansion funding if you ever want to open additional locations. Marcus felt overwhelmed again, but this time it was different. The initial shock of the Marines' intervention had given way to a growing understanding of what he was becoming part of. This wasn't just about saving his barbershop anymore. It was about creating something that could influence how communities support their most vulnerable members. The night before the grand opening, Marcus stood in his completed shop, surrounded by everything he'd dreamed of and much more. 4 fully equipped barber stations, a retail area stocked with premium grooming products, a community bulletin board already filled with job postings and support group announcements, and a small office where Daniel would coordinate the Veteran Services Program. His sister Jennifer had driven down from Flagstaff with her family for the opening. His parents, who had raised him in a neighborhood not far from his original shop, were beaming with pride. Most of his former customers had promised to make the trip to the new location. Are you nervous? Daniel asked, arriving early to help with final preparations. Terrified, Marcus admitted. What if I can't live up to all this? What if I disappoint everyone who's invested in me? Daniel smiled. You want to know what Staff Sergeant Rodriguez told me yesterday? He said the Marines didn't choose you because they thought you were perfect. They chose you because they knew you were real. Everything that's happened, you've earned through years of treating people right when nobody was watching. Besides, Daniel added, adjusting his new shirt, he'd been shopping for professional clothes since accepting the coordinator position. You're not doing this alone anymore. You've got a whole community behind you now. As Marcus locked up the shop that night, he realized Daniel was right. Tomorrow wouldn't just be the opening of a new barbershop. It would be the official launch of something unprecedented, a veteran-owned, community-supported business that existed as much to serve others as to turn a profit. The scared, overwhelmed small business owner who'd faced eviction just 2 months ago had evolved into something he'd never expected to become, a community leader whose simple act of kindness had snowballed into a movement that was already inspiring similar initiatives in other cities. Tomorrow, Thompson's Traditional Cuts would open its doors, not just as a barbershop, but as proof that treating people with dignity and respect could change everything. Grand opening day arrived with unseasonably cool weather for November in Phoenix, perfect for the outdoor festivities that had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Marcus arrived at 6 in the morning to find a small crowd already gathering outside Thompson's Traditional Cuts. The first person in line was an elderly veteran named Frank Kowalski, who'd driven 3 hours from Tucson after hearing about the shop through the Marine network. "Haven't had a proper military-style haircut in 15 years," he told Marcus. Figured this was worth the drive. Behind Frank stood a diverse group that represented the true scope of what the shop had become. Young professionals from the downtown business district, families from Marcus's old neighborhood, veterans of all ages, and even a delegation from the Phoenix City Council, who wanted to witness what they were already calling the Thompson model of community business development. Mayor Rebecca Santos arrived at 8:30, accompanied by local news crews and photographers. As she prepared to cut the ceremonial ribbon, she spoke about the broader significance of the day. "What we're celebrating here isn't just a new business," she announced to the growing crowd. "We're celebrating proof that when we invest in people who invest in their communities, everybody wins." Marcus Thompson represents the best of Phoenix entrepreneurship, grounded in service, committed to excellence, and determined to lift others as he climbs. The ribbon cutting was followed by the shop's first official customer. Daniel had arranged for Frank Kowalski to receive the honor, and as Marcus began the haircut, he reflected on how different this moment felt from that quiet Tuesday morning, when he'd approached Daniel on the bus bench. The first day saw a steady stream of customers, each bringing their own story. Maria Gonzalez, a local teacher, brought her teenage son for his first professional haircut before his homecoming dance. "I wanted him to experience what a real barbershop feels like," she explained. "My grandfather always said a good barber was worth his weight in gold." Around noon, 3 young Marines in dress blues walked through the door. Corporal James Murphy, recently returned from deployment, had heard about Thompson's through the base network at Luke Air Force Base. Sergeant Major Jackson said this was the place to come for a regulation cut that didn't look like it came from base, Murphy explained as he settled into the chair. As Marcus worked, Murphy shared his own transition story. He was considering leaving the Marines after his current tour ended, but wasn't sure what civilian career path to pursue. Daniel, overhearing from his coordinator desk, approached with a folder full of resources. "We've got connections with construction companies, security firms, logistics operations, and IT training programs," Daniel explained. "The goal isn't just to get you a job, it's to help you find a career that uses your military skills in ways that fulfill you." By mid-afternoon, the ribbon cutting had evolved into an impromptu community celebration. Mrs. Chun had set up a flower stand outside, creating arrangements for customers to take home. Tommy Ramirez was grilling hot dogs and hamburgers in the parking lot behind the shop, refusing to accept payment from anyone. The most powerful moment came when a group of homeless veterans arrived, clearly uncertain about whether they belonged at such a festive event. Marcus immediately stepped outside to greet them personally. "Today's cuts are on the house for everyone," he announced. "But more than that, I want you to know this shop is here for you whenever you need it." One of the men, introducing himself as Robert Hayes, had served in Vietnam and been living on the streets for 2 years. "I heard what you did for Danny Patterson," he said quietly. "Wasn't sure if the story was true, but I figured it was worth checking out." "Every word is true," Marcus replied. "And every Thursday, we're here specifically for veterans who need more than just a haircut. Job placement, housing assistance, healthcare navigation, whatever you need to get back on your feet." As Robert settled into the chair, Marcus noticed something he'd observed with Daniel months earlier. Despite years of hardship, there was still pride in the man's posture, still dignity in his bearing. The haircut would help reveal what was already there. The day's most unexpected visitors arrived just before closing. A sleek black sedan pulled up outside, and two men in expensive suits stepped out. Marcus tensed, wondering if there was some problem with permits or regulations he hadn't anticipated. Instead, the men introduced themselves as executives from Phoenix Dynamics, a major defense contracting company based in Scottsdale. CEO Jonathan Mitchell extended his hand with a warm smile. "We've been following your story through the Veteran Services Network," Mitchell explained. "My company employs over 3,000 veterans, and we're always looking for ways to better support the transition process." Mitchell's partner, VP of Human Resources Linda Walsh, pulled out a business proposal. "We'd like to establish a formal partnership with Thompson's Traditional Cuts. Our employees would receive discounted services, and in return, we'd provide funding for your veteran services program and guaranteed job interviews for qualified candidates you refer." The proposal was staggering in its scope. Phoenix Dynamics was offering to underwrite the entire Thursday Veteran Services program, provide professional development workshops, and create a pipeline for employment that could help dozens of veterans. Each month, "We've tried traditional corporate social responsibility programs," Walsh explained. "But what you've created here is different. It's authentic. It's organic. It's what corporate partnerships should look like when they're done right." As the executives left with plans to finalize the partnership within the week, Marcus realized the day had brought transformations he hadn't anticipated. The shop that had opened that morning as a neighborhood barber shop was closing as the center of a comprehensive veteran support network with corporate backing and government recognition. Jackson, Rodriguez, and Williams gathered with Marcus and Daniel as they cleaned up after the celebration. The Marines who had saved his business were now partners in something much larger than any of them had originally envisioned. "You know what the best part of today was?" Rodriguez asked as they stacked chairs and swept up. "The look on that kid Murphy's face when Daniel showed him all those job opportunities," Williams answered. 6 months ago, he was probably dreading his transition out of the military. Now he's got a whole support system. Jackson nodded toward the bulletin board, now covered with business cards, job postings, and contact information. "This is what success looks like. Not just profit margins or customer counts, but lives changed, communities strengthened, networks created." As Marcus locked up the shop that night, he walked through each station, remembering the customers who'd sat in these chairs on opening day. Frank from Tucson, who'd left with tears in his eyes after his first professional cut in years. Robert, who'd scheduled a job interview for the following week through Daniel's connections. Corporal Murphy, who'd signed up for 3 different professional development workshops. The scared business owner who'd faced eviction was gone, replaced by someone Marcus was still getting to know. A community leader, a veteran advocate, a bridge between worlds that rarely intersected. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new chances to prove that treating people with dignity and respect could change not just individual lives, but entire communities. The grand opening had been more than a celebration. It had been a demonstration of what became possible when kindness was amplified by community, when individual acts of service became collective movements for change. 6 months after the grand opening, Thompson's Traditional Cuts had become something unprecedented in Phoenix. What started as a simple barbershop had evolved into a comprehensive veteran support hub that was drawing national attention from policymakers, business leaders, and military organizations. The numbers told part of the story. Daniel's carefully maintained records showed that the Thursday Veteran Services Program had helped 83 veterans find employment, assisted 47 with housing placements, and connected over 200 with healthcare and benefit services they'd been unable to navigate alone. But the real impact was visible in the transformed lives walking through the door each day. Robert Hayes, the Vietnam veteran who'd arrived homeless on opening day, now worked as a night security supervisor at Phoenix Dynamics and had his own apartment for the first time in 3 years. He'd become a regular customer, stopping in every 2 weeks for a trim and staying to mentor newly arrived veterans. The difference between then and now, Robert told a documentary crew filming at the shop, isn't just that I have a job and a place to live. It's that I remember who I am again. This place reminded me that being a veteran is something to be proud of, not something to hide. Corporal Murphy had transitioned out of the Marines and was now studying cybersecurity through a program Phoenix Dynamics had developed specifically for military veterans. His success had prompted the company to expand their partnership, creating similar programs with 5 other veteran-serving businesses across Arizona. The ripple effects extended far beyond individual success stories. Margaret Foster from the Small Business Administration had featured Thompson's in a national best practices guide that was being distributed to chambers of commerce in 37 states. The Thompson model was inspiring similar initiatives in Atlanta, Denver, Seattle, and San Antonio. Marcus found himself traveling more than he'd ever expected, speaking at conferences and consulting with other business owners who wanted to create community-centered enterprises. The shy barber who'd once struggled to make rent was now addressing audiences at the Pentagon about the intersection of small business and veteran services. The secret isn't complicated, he told a gathering of military transition specialists. In Washington, D.C., you treat people like they matter, you listen to what they need, and you build solutions around their dignity rather than their problems. The Phoenix location had expanded twice, now occupying the entire corner building. In addition to the original 4 Barber chairs, the space included a small classroom where Williams conducted job interview workshops, a computer lab for resume writing and online applications, and a quiet meeting area where veterans could connect with counselors and caseworkers. Jackson had stepped back from his government position to become the full-time executive director of the Semper Fi Community Foundation, which had grown to support veteran-serving businesses in 6 states. The foundation's model was attracting attention from major philanthropists and corporate sponsors who saw it as a more effective approach than traditional charity work. We're not giving handouts, Jackson explained to a foundation board meeting that now included executives from 3 Fortune 500 companies. We're investing in people who've already proven their commitment to service. We're just giving them platforms to continue serving in civilian life. The most significant validation came from an unexpected source. The Department of Veterans Affairs announced a pilot program based on Thompson's model, planning to partner with veteran-owned businesses in 10 major cities to create comprehensive transition support centers. What Mr. Thompson and his team have demonstrated, said VA Secretary Patricia Coleman during the program announcement, is that the most effective veteran services happen in environments where veterans feel valued and understood. Barber shops, restaurants, auto repair shops, small businesses where the owner gets it. These are the places where real healing and growth occur. Daniel had become the unofficial spokesperson for the movement, traveling to military bases across the country to speak about post-service transition. His transformation from homeless veteran to program coordinator had become a powerful illustration of what was possible when communities invested in their most vulnerable members. People ask me all the time about the moment my life changed, Daniel told an audience at Camp Pendleton. They expect me to say it was when I got the job, or when I found housing, or when I started working at Thompson's. But the real moment was when Marcus looked at me sitting on that bench and saw a Marine worth caring about. Everything else followed. From that recognition, the story had come full circle in ways Marcus never could have anticipated. The Small Business Administration had invited him to serve on a national advisory committee for veteran entrepreneurship. Phoenix Dynamics had offered to franchise the Thompson's model, providing startup funding for veteran barbers who wanted to open similar shops in other cities. Most surprisingly, Marcus had been approached by publishers interested in turning his story into a book, with proceeds going to support veteran transition programs. The quiet barber who'd never imagined his life would extend beyond his neighborhood was now being asked to share his insights with a national audience. But the moments that mattered most still happened in the shop itself. Like the afternoon when Frank Kowalski, the elderly veteran who'd driven from Tucson for the grand opening, brought his grandson for his first military-style haircut before the young man shipped out to basic training. 3 generations of Marines. In this chair, Frank said as Marcus worked on his grandson's hair, this is what tradition looks like. Or the day when Patricia Hernandez, his former landlord, brought her nephew who was struggling with PTSD after returning from deployment. I know you're not therapists, she said, but I also know what happens here is healing. The Thursday Veteran Services program had become so successful that it now required appointments, with a waiting list that extended weeks in advance. What had started as a simple offering of free haircuts had evolved into comprehensive case management, with social workers, job counselors, and healthcare navigators working alongside Daniel to address every aspect of veteran transition. As Marcus prepared to close the shop on a Thursday evening in late spring, he surveyed the scene that had become familiar over the past months. Veterans of different ages and backgrounds sat around the community area, sharing job leads, discussing housing options, and simply enjoying the camaraderie that military service had taught them to value. Jackson stopped by as he did most evenings, reviewing the day's successes and planning upcoming initiatives. You know what's funny? He said as they watched the veterans interact. We started this foundation thinking we were going to save struggling businesses. Turns out we were really creating a new model for how communities can support each other. Rodriguez arrived with coffee and updates from the construction job site, where he'd placed 3 veterans that week. Williams brought news about a healthcare partnership that would provide free services to veterans served by the foundation. The Marines who had rescued Marcus's barbershop had become partners in a movement that was reshaping how America thought about veteran support. As the last customers left and Marcus began his closing routine, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The eviction notice that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something he never could have imagined. A simple act of kindness had grown into a national model for community support. A struggling barbershop had become a comprehensive veteran services center. A neighborhood business owner had become a voice for change in how society supports its most vulnerable members. But at its core, the story remained unchanged. It was still about treating people with dignity, recognizing their worth, and believing that everyone deserves a chance to succeed. The scale had grown, the impact had multiplied, but the fundamental truth remained the same. When you see someone's humanity and respond with kindness, you create possibilities that extend far beyond what either of you could achieve alone. Marcus turned off the lights and locked the door, knowing that tomorrow would bring new veterans, new stories, new opportunities, to prove that small acts of service could create lasting change. The scared business owner facing eviction was now a community leader whose story was inspiring similar transformations across the country. The Marines had been right about one thing from the very beginning: kindness, when amplified by community and sustained by commitment, could change everything. 1 year after the grand opening, Marcus received a phone call that would challenge everything he thought he understood about the reach of his story. The caller was Colonel Sarah Bennett, commanding officer of the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force, calling from Camp Courtney in Okinawa, Japan. Mr. Thompson, I hope you have a few minutes, Colonel Bennett said. I'm calling about a Marine under my command who's been sharing your story throughout our deployment. What you did for Daniel Patterson has traveled further than you might imagine. The Marine in question was Gunnery Sergeant Michael Chun, Mrs. Chun's nephew from the flower shop, who had deployed to Japan 6 months earlier. He'd been carrying a printed copy of a news article about Thompson's traditional cuts, sharing it with fellow Marines who were struggling with the prospect of eventual civilian transition. Gunny Chun has created an informal support network here, based on your model, Colonel Bennett explained. Marines helping other Marines prepare for life after service, all inspired by what they've learned about your barbershop. But we have a situation that requires your expertise. The situation involved Staff Sergeant Anthony Rivera, a decorated Marine with 3 combat deployments who was facing medical retirement due to injuries sustained in a training accident. Rivera had become increasingly isolated, refusing to participate in transition planning and expressing deep pessimism about his future prospects. He's convinced that civilian employers will see him as damaged goods, Colonel Bennett continued. Gunny Chun believes that hearing directly from you and maybe Daniel might make the difference between a successful transition and a tragedy. Within a week, Marcus found himself on a military transport flight to Japan, accompanied by Daniel and Jackson. The Department of Defense had expedited their travel after learning about the mission, seeing it as an opportunity to test whether the Thompson model could work in military settings overseas. The flight gave Marcus time to process how dramatically his world had expanded. A year ago, his biggest concern was making monthly rent. Now he was traveling internationally as a consultant on veteran transition issues, invited by the military to help save a Marine's future. Camp Courtney was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. The base buzzed with activity as Marines prepared for training exercises and administrative duties. But in the quiet of the base chapel where they met Staff Sergeant Rivera, the fundamental human challenges were identical to those Marcus encountered every Thursday at his shop. Rivera was a compact, intense man whose eyes carried the weight of experiences Marcus could only imagine. When Daniel introduced himself and shared his own story of homelessness and recovery, something shifted in Rivera's demeanor. "You were really living on the streets?" Rivera asked. "A Marine?" "For 8 months," Daniel confirmed. "I thought my service meant nothing in the civilian world. I thought I was broken beyond repair. I was wrong about both things, but I needed help to see that." Over the course of 3 days, Marcus and Daniel worked with Rivera and 15 other Marines who were facing various transition challenges. They conducted mock job interviews, discussed civilian workplace dynamics, and most importantly, helped the Marines reframe their military experience as an asset rather than a liability. The breakthrough came when Rivera, who had been a motor transport mechanic, learned about the logistics opportunities available through Phoenix Dynamics' veteran hiring program. "You mean companies actually value military transportation experience?" he asked incredulously. "They don't just value it," Jackson explained via video call from Phoenix. "They're desperate for it. The discipline, attention to detail, ability to work under pressure, these are skills most civilian employees take years to develop, if ever." Colonel Bennett observed the sessions with keen interest. "What you're doing here is remarkable," she told Marcus. "You're not just providing career counseling. You're giving these Marines permission to see themselves as valuable." The impact extended beyond the individual Marines they worked with directly. Word spread throughout the base about the civilians who had traveled from America, specifically to help with transition planning. Marines who had never considered seeking assistance began asking questions about civilian careers and educational opportunities. The base commander, Brigadier General James Walsh, invited Marcus to address a larger gathering of Marines nearing the end of their enlistments. Standing before 200 Marines in the base theater, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility unlike anything he'd experienced. "I'm not here to tell you that civilian life is easy," he began. "I'm here to tell you that who you are as Marines, your integrity, your commitment, your willingness to serve something bigger than yours, these qualities don't disappear when you take off the uniform. They make you exactly the kind of people that smart employers are looking for. After the presentation, Marcus was approached by Captain Lisa Rodriguez, a Marine intelligence officer who was planning her own transition. "I've been dreading leaving the Corps," she admitted. "But listening to you and Daniel, I'm starting to think maybe I've been looking at this all wrong." Captain Rodriguez revealed that she'd been documenting the transition experiences of Marines at Camp Courtney, gathering data for her master's thesis in organizational psychology. Her research showed patterns that aligned perfectly with what Marcus had observed at his barbershop. The Marines who struggle most with transition are the ones who feel like their service identity becomes irrelevant in civilian life, she explained. But the ones who thrive are those who find ways to continue serving, just in different contexts. This insight sparked a new collaboration. Captain Rodriguez proposed creating a formal research partnership between her graduate program at Arizona State University and the Semper Fi Community Foundation. The goal would be to develop evidence-based transition programs that could be implemented on military bases worldwide. The trip concluded with an unexpected ceremony. Colonel Bennett had arranged for Marcus, Daniel, and Jackson to receive honorary CERTIF-ICATs, recognizing their contribution to Marine readiness and welfare. As they stood before the assembled Marines, Marcus reflected on the surreal nature of the moment. "A year ago, I was facing eviction from a small barbershop in Phoenix," he told the crowd. "Today, I'm receiving recognition from the United States Marine Corps. The difference isn't that I became someone extraordinary. The difference is that I learned what becomes possible when we choose to see the extraordinary in each other." Staff Sergeant Rivera approached them after the ceremony with news that would validate the entire mission. He had accepted a position with a logistics company in San Diego, arranged through connections Daniel had made with Phoenix Dynamics California partners. "6 months ago, I was planning to disappear after my medical retirement," Rivera told them. "Quietly, I thought my life was over. You guys showed me it was just beginning a new chapter." The flight back to Phoenix carried a different energy than their departure. They'd proven that the Thompson model could work anywhere, in barbershops, on military bases, in corporate boardrooms, wherever people committed to treating each other with dignity and respect. Daniel spent the flight working on plans for a new initiative, training civilian volunteers to provide transition support on military bases near major cities. "We can't personally visit every Marine who needs help," he said, "but we can train others to do this work." Jackson was already fielding calls from other military commands interested in hosting similar visits. The Marine Corps had formally requested that the Semper Fi Community Foundation develop a standardized program that could be implemented across all Marine installations. As they landed in Phoenix, Marcus realized that their 3-day trip to Japan had fundamentally altered the trajectory of their mission. What had started as helping individual veterans in a single barbershop was now evolving into a comprehensive approach to military transition that could impact thousands of service members annually. The scared barber facing eviction had become an international consultant on veteran affairs. The homeless Marine had become a transition specialist working with active duty personnel. The retired Marines who had started a small foundation had created a model that was attracting attention from the highest levels of military leadership. But the core truth remained unchanged. When people felt valued and supported, they found ways to thrive that exceeded everyone's expectations, including their own. 2 years after that first haircut changed everything, Marcus stood in the White House Rose Garden, waiting to meet the President of the United States. The invitation had come through the Department of Veterans Affairs, recognizing Thompson's traditional cuts as the model program for veteran transition services nationwide. Beside him stood Daniel, now the National Director of Transition Services for the Semper Fi Community Foundation, and Staff Sergeant Rivera, who had flown in from San Diego, where he was managing logistics for a major shipping company. The three men represented different stages of the same journey: the helper, the helped, and the one who had learned to help others. President Harris greeted them personally before the ceremony. "What you've accomplished represents the best of American entrepreneurship and veteran support," she said. "You've proven that the most effective government programs are often the ones that support community-led solutions rather than replacing them." The ceremony was brief but powerful. Marcus received the Presidential Medal of Freedom for civilian service, while the Semper Fi Community Foundation was designated as the official partner for the new National Veteran Transition Initiative. The program would establish Thompson Model centers in 50 cities within 2 years. Standing at the podium, Marcus looked out at an audience that included military leaders, business executives, and veteran advocates from across the country. In the front row sat Mrs. Chun, beaming with pride, next to Jackson and Rodriguez, who had traveled from their respective foundation offices in 6 different states. "2 years ago, I thought success meant keeping my small barbershop open," Marcus began. "I never imagined that one simple act of kindness would lead to this moment. But that's the thing about treating people with dignity, you never know where it will lead." He paused, finding Daniel's eyes in the crowd. "The real heroes in this story aren't the people receiving recognition today. They're the veterans who had the courage to accept help, the community members who chose to get involved, and the business leaders who decided that profit and purpose could work together." After the ceremony, Marcus was approached by CNN's Anderson Cooper for an interview that would air that evening. "What's next for Thompson's traditional cuts?" Cooper asked. "We're opening our 100th location next month," Marcus replied. "But the locations are just the beginning. We're training social workers, business owners, and community leaders to recognize that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. That's a lesson that extends far beyond veteran services." The interview concluded with Cooper asking about Marcus's personal transformation. "Do you miss the simplicity of running a single barbershop?" Marcus smiled, thinking about his original shop on East Roosevelt Street. "I still cut hair every Tuesday at our Phoenix location. It keeps me grounded, reminds me why we started this work. But simple doesn't always mean better. Sometimes you discover that your capacity to serve is much greater than you ever imagined." That evening, Marcus returned to Phoenix and the shop, where it all began. The corner location now served as the flagship for a national network, but Thursday evenings still belonged to individual veterans seeking individual help. Tonight, a young Marine named Jennifer Walsh was preparing for her first civilian job interview, practicing answers while Marcus trimmed her hair. "I'm scared I won't know how to be anything other than a Marine," she admitted. "Being a Marine isn't something you stop being," Marcus replied, using the same words Daniel had shared with him years ago. "It's something you figure out how to be in different contexts." As Walsh left with renewed confidence and a scheduled follow-up appointment, Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Still feel like it was worth it?" he asked, a question that had become their ritual on quiet Thursday evenings. Marcus looked around the shop at the wall of photographs showing hundreds of successful transitions, at the bulletin board covered with job announcements and success stories, at the simple barber chair where it all started. "Every single day," he replied. Outside, Phoenix glittered in the desert evening, home to thousands of veterans who now had a place where their service was valued, and their futures were bright with possibility. Across the country, similar shops in similar communities were creating similar transformations, all because one barber had decided that every person deserved to be treated with dignity. The scared small business owner was gone, replaced by a national advocate whose story proved that kindness, when amplified by community and sustained by commitment, could indeed change everything. But at its heart, the mission remained beautifully simple: treat people like they matter and watch what becomes possible. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.